So one thing Porochista and I were talking about before this event is we both like a lot of experimental writers, but we were talking about how Can Xue's work is actually much harder to describe than even writers you think of as being difficult or like elusive, like Yoko Tawada or Clarice Lispector. And I was thinking about that while preparing this introduction, and I was struck by something that Can Xue wrote in an interview in Asymptote, where she said, all modernist art is performance art. And I kind of thought that was a key to help me understand Can Xue's work, because when you think of modernist art, you think of art that's analytical, atheistic, and abstract. But when you think of performance art, you think of something that's in the body, something that's gestural. And I kind of feel like the way to understand Can Xue's work is actually to see it as a fusion of this sort of bipolar sensibility, at once very embodied, weird, gestural, dance-like, but on the other hand, very intellectual, angular, plastic, abstract. She said that she writes sequentially without edits, and I think this explains her work as a kind of gesture, but an analytical gesture. One way to think about performance is not just being a spectacle yourself, but performance is a type of vitality. It's the body in motion in relative relationship to an audience. And this sort of vitality goes through her work and explains often the parts that are very contradictory. For example, I read in the same interview, she talks about how one of the writers that's influenced her a lot is Franz Kafka. And she says that she loved Kafka not just for his existential despair, but because of his work is suffused with a sense of pleasant freedom, which is not how I think anyone else in this room would describe Kafka. But this is how you would describe Kafka if you didn't believe in original sin, and if you were interested in his modernist sensibility, but you were not a neurotic. And what does it mean to write as a modernist without being a neurotic? Similarly, Can Xue's work is often contextualized within the high culture fever of sort of 80s bohemian Chinese fiction. But when you look at the other writers, mostly Chinese bros who write huge novels, they are, those books are often highly political, one might say didactic. They're very brutalistic, and they're often invested in a kind of rural folklore life. But though Can Xue's own family was targeted by the Cultural Revolution, and clearly there's links with contemporary China, her work is not really political or invested in kind of folk myths in the same way. If you're familiar with her work, you might have read of a character see her own mother melt into soap bubbles. But the story doesn't end there. The soap bubbles still harass her to do, the housework. You've seen a woman, a mysterious Madame X. A lot of the characters have only a letter for a name, as in Laura writing. Lose the pupils in her eyes, but actually learn how to see better. You've encountered impossible spaces, but often spaces that are very urban in nature. These are stories that are often feminist, but in a very profane, confusing way. Very sexual and lusty, but in a way that's anti-erotic, you might say. I think in 5 Spice Street, she says that the widow is the best lover. The works are often violent and depraved, but unlike many of the other writers I mentioned, they're never brutal. And often uncanny, nightmarish things happen, but in a strangely fun, zany way. These are works that are never psychological, but often psychoanalytical. So we have a great evening here tonight. Thank you all for coming. Porochista will read from one of Can Xue's short stories. Then you're in luck, as she'll read a story that actually has never been published, or an essay that's never been published about the body in modernist art, and then we'll have a conversation. I want to thank Wayne Liu for coming to interpret the conversation part. And we're welcome to have an old friend of AAWW who has read here since I started, and before her first book was published, I think, the author of Suns and Other Flammable Objects and The Last Illusion. Let's give a hand to Porochista.
Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to be back here, and thank you, Ken, for hosting indeed the only appearance of Can Xue. We're very, very lucky, and I'm very lucky to be brought along to this tour with her because I consider her my greatest teacher, a great mentor, as well as now a friend. The backstory on our friendship was because, well, I think I'm going to read a little bit about that in this intro, but I can't remember. But it was the Neustadt jury. I was one of the jurors for what they call the American Nobel. And it's a very unusual prize because we actually tell the person that we've nominated them. So all the jurors were like telling like Carolyn Forche and all these like major writers that like we are nominating you, just so you know. I'm not sure why. But it allowed me to be in email correspondence with her, and we've never stopped being in email correspondence since then. So it's been over a year or a couple years, and we have been, everything from health advice to all sorts of personal advice, literary advice, all sorts of things. And she did not need to have read my work, but she did read it. And she really liked The Last Illusion, which I was so honored. I tried to discourage her from reading it, but she read it and liked it, thank God. And then we just became very close. So it's been over a year's worth of work for us to get her here. It's been very, very difficult to orchestrate, and many people wanted her to come, but there was, flight issues, scheduling issues, and all that. So this is her last stop. As she's gone all over the place. We went to MIT. We started MIT, and then Rochester, Buffalo, St. Louis. We just did Bard University yesterday, and this is the last stop. And then she'll be here for a few days in New York. We're going to go to the museum tomorrow. So I don't want her to leave. And we're trying to scheme for her to move to the US, which she says is maybe possible, which is exciting. So I'm going to read a little bit from an introduction that I was asked to write for her next book. Her next book is called Frontier. And I'm just going to read parts of it, not so much parts of the book, but parts that might tell you a little bit about my relationship with her. And then I'm going to read the first story by her that I ever read, The Child Who Raised Poisonous Snakes, which I think is quite an amazing story. And a lot of people have that was probably the first time they were exposed to her. So I'm going to read that, and then, yes, she's going to do an exclusive on an essay that has not been published, which is very exciting. And she's going to read that in English. And I think this is the only time on your tour you've read in English fully, right? Yeah, so we're very lucky. This is a very special event. So in my intro, I talk about, well, I'll just go ahead. In the summer of 2016, I found myself in a place on a 20,000-acre working cattle ranch in the middle of a desolate stretch of northeastern Wyoming. Ucross, Wyoming, population 25. It's an artist residency I've been to twice before, and one could indeed dare to call it a part of the old mythos of the American frontier. There's nothing to do but work. Once a week, the residents and I go to a saloon about 25 miles away in Buffalo, where local cowboys and cowgirls play bluegrass. This saloon, part of a hotel called the Occidental, has been a haunt of everyone from Butch Cassidy to Buffalo Bill. That's about the only thing there is to do. These high plains are where I've done most of my writing in the past decade, and it became where I did most all my reading of Chen Xue's Frontier this time around. This residency, my own writing, escaped me as Chen Xue's book demanded more and more of my time. I had thought a few days would be all I needed. I was not a new Chen Xue reader after all, and I'd managed to plow through even her most difficult work in a couple days usually. I've read all her works in translation. But this was not the case with the recent novel. In fact, a curious thing happened to me as I began to read. The further I got, the longer the book seemed to get. It was shocking. The book would lengthen the more I got into it. The book wouldn't end, I told a friend. It's strange. I swore I was 200 pages in a few days ago, and there I am today. Days later, I felt like I'd made very little progress. It went on like this for quite some time till my time was basically up. This is usually a complaint, something taking a long time, a book requiring effort. Time flying indicates an enjoyable exploit. This is what you want. But this time around, even this sentiment felt reversed. I didn't want the book to end, and the story, perhaps sensing that, refused to end. Even when it ended, it didn't end. I just started reading it again. I went from the last pages to the first without breath. I had no choice. One might say this summer I found myself trapped in Chen Xue's Frontier. This, of course, would have not surprised my friend Can Xue. It seems to be a part of the fabric of the book, and of course, who could put a stunt like this past her? She is China's premier writer of avant-garde, an experimental trickster whose very name is not just a pen name, but an alter ego. She refers to herself in third person, and so who could possibly put anything past her? We've been regularly emailing for a year now, so I thought to write her amidst all this. I didn't want to alarm her, so I asked her a mild question at first, not sure how to explain my dilemma to her. This book is lengthening as I read it, not shortening. Help me. So instead I said, Dear Xiaohua, which she goes by, how did you come up with this? I literally wrote it in this email, which is such a lazy thing to do when you're asked to write an intro to a book. You don't write the author and say help, but I did this. I should have known the question would go nowhere. She wrote back quickly. Like all works by Can Xue, the idea was from her dark heart. The idea, I, Can Xue, didn't know clearly what it was, but I did know that it was something I wanted, and it came out gradually, naturally. I wrote and wrote for some time, then someday I found a great pattern appeared faintly in the work. Actually, anything I wrote, or am writing, or will write, is like this, I'm sure. I call the pattern of freedom. In Frontier, everybody, every animal is a pattern of freedom. The background is the background of the great pattern of freedom. Her final sign-off was appended with a polite, please feel free to ask Xiaohua anything. I did not. I simply sat and stared at the yellow and blue expanse in front of me, the Bighorn Mountains looming faintly like the purple mountain majesties of American patriotic verse, and all the high grass interrupted by only an occasional creek, prairie upon prairie only punctuated by blackbirds, bison, rabbits, deer, antelope, a turkey or two. The pattern of freedom. Was this freedom? Was freedom expansion instead of contraction? Was freedom in its essence eternity? After all, by frontier, by definition, means the extreme limit of settled land beyond which lies wilderness. That I knew. So what were the borders of the frontier? No one could know, most likely, I decided. The minute the borders are set, it's possible the thing ceases to be the frontier. I came to Can Xue about 6 years ago. In 2010, I was teaching a world literature class, intro, at an arts college in Santa Fe. I had chosen Daniel Halpern's International Reader, The Art of the Story, that came out in 2000, as one of my principal texts. Most of the writers I had heard of, but there were a few I didn't know about, so I went reading those very carefully. One was the Can Xue story, The Child Who Raised Poisonous Snakes. And that was definitely the most bizarre story I've ever read. And this is saying something, because I have a big appetite for the bizarre. When I taught it, a few students got the bug like me, but many were confused and even traumatized by it. I'm going to read it after this. So, I was secretly happy about that. I wanted her to myself. I imagined a weird cult all around the world of her admirers, her allure completely lost on normals. Occasionally, I'd asked people about her, and 9 times out of 10, they had no idea who I was talking about. But when they did, it was instant cult camaraderie. And then I talk about getting to know her through the Neustadt, of course, which I just told you. And then I say, every time Can Xue has a book out in English translation, it's yet another opportunity to see if that cult of Can Xue can expand. And one expects it won't, but I've seen it with my own eyes. Those chosen ones who really bite can't let go. And so how does one introduce her? I always begin with her name. Can Xue's name is a pseudonym that means both the dirty snow that refuses to melt and the purest snow at the top of a high mountain. And it happens to be synonymous with Chinese experimental literature. She's the author of 6 novels, 50 novellas, 120 short stories, and 6 book-length commentaries, with only a half dozen of her works published in English. She's had 5 English translators, all of whom she refers to like they are close collaborators and even friends. Robert Coover called her a New World master. Susan Sontag believes she was worthy of a Nobel, and Eileen Miles is one of her biggest fans, and she actually is a friend of mine too and wishes she was here. It's very sad not to be. She has to be in Texas. Then there is herself, the transmission of her writer persona through interviews. Here's the writer as true iconoclast, the uncompromising original. A choice quote on her process. It's a quote, I never edit my stories. I just grab a pen and write, and every day I write a paragraph. For more than 30 years, it's always been like this. I believe that I'm surrounded by a powerful aura, and that's the secret of my success. Successful artists are all able to manipulate the balance of forces. They're that kind of extraordinarily talented people. As I mentioned, she refers to herself in third person, describes fiction as a performance, and claims that all of her works are from experiments in which she takes herself as subject. In this sense, Can Xue is almost more medium than artist, a vessel rather than a generator, creation being relegated to its perhaps most logical state, the mystical. Here's another quote by her. In my mind, my ideal readers are those who have read some works by modernist writers and those who love metaphysical thinking and material thinking. Both capabilities are needed for the reading of Can Xue. She's also of the late bloomer species, one who did not come to her work well until adulthood, a story I don't relate to, but now wish I did. A quote by her, I decided to become a writer when I was 30 years old, but I think before that I'd been preparing for this actually since I was 3 years old. After the situation in China changed, all the literary things happened to me naturally. I've been like an erupting volcano ever since. She began writing around 1982, and she's now 63, and I think at her peak, it feels like. So it's hard to say when she wasn't at her peak, but she went into the right business, I think. Her last novel, The Last Lover, which you can find there, which was Yale University Press, won a big 2015 translation award, BTBA, and got her even more attention in the States. And all the events we've done have been packed. I mean, I don't think we've been at an event that's been under 100 people. So one might say that Can Xue has never really quite broken out in the US. We could also say that in the same way, maybe even China or anywhere for that matter, but it's starting to happen. I always say the same thing when a book of hers is about to come out. It will be interesting what people make of this one. I'm not even sure who I'm talking about, perhaps my ideal reader, but here I go again with Frontier. It will be interesting what people make of this one. And I get into a long, very exhausting dissection of Frontier that I'm in. She'll see it when it's in print, but hopefully. It was the hardest book, and it's amazing, and I can't wait for it to come out this spring for you guys all to read it, because it is amazing. So I'm going to go back to the piece that a rather very short story by her. So this will be fiction, and then she's going to read a lecture, The Child Who Raised Poisonous Snakes. And I think for many people have seen the story in that Halpern collection, and this is the intro to her. So here we go. It's a story I just love. I hope I'm saying this right. Sha Yuan? Sha Yuan. She's told me this 8 million times by now, and I will still get it wrong. But so I also have a difficult name, so I feel heartened to be. Okay. Sha Yuan, one might call Sandy Plain, was a child with an ordinary face, lacking any notable features. When he was not talking, his face was dead blank. But of course, this is somewhat different from being a corpse. He was a very well-behaved child, his mother explained to me. The only trouble with him is that he should never have been allowed outdoors. There wouldn't have been any trouble if he stayed at home. We discovered this problem when he was 6. Once he sneaked away without the notice of his father and me. I looked for him everywhere. Finally, we found him sleeping among the rose bushes in the park. He was lying on his back with his limbs stretched out in a casual way. He told us later that he had not seen any roses, but many snake heads. He could see even the bones inside the snakes. Then as one snake bit him, he'd fallen asleep. To tell the truth, he hadn't seen a single snake in his life up to that point. He only saw snakes on TV. His father and I were terrified, and we were more cautious than ever to let him out. While we were talking, Sha Yuan was sitting in the room facing a cupboard door covered with paper resembling wood grain, absolutely still and motionless. In my astonishment, I kept peering at him. Don't pay attention to him. He long ago acquired the ability not to listen whenever he doesn't want to. Once a doctor suggested that we take the child to a resort and let him socialize with other people. According to the doctor, this would improve his condition. So we went to the seashore. He often played with the kind of unruly children one finds at the seaside during the day, but he felt tired very easily. We've been observing him because we couldn't help but feel anxious about the child. When he felt tired, he simply lay down no matter where and fell asleep. He became so languid that he could sleep while washing his feet in the evening. We thought he was washing, but it was no more than a mechanical movement. His brain was at rest. The 3rd day after our arrival at the seaside, a fisherman's son ran in with a bleeding finger, telling us that Sha Yuan had bitten him. We questioned him afterward about the incident. He smiled absent-mindedly and claimed the finger was the head of a snake. If he had not bitten it, it would have bitten him. So we stayed at the shore for a month. Apparently, the beautiful scenery had no positive influence on Sha Yuan. That year, he turned 9. After that, we traveled somewhere every year, to the desert or the lakes, the forest or the plains, but he was completely indifferent. Sitting in the train, he behaved exactly as he did at home, never looking at the window, never talking to anybody. It was possible he did not even know he was traveling. But his father and I knew that the child had been too carefree ever since he was young. He never paid attention to his surroundings. He might have been a little cold. I don't know how to put it, but he lacked sensitivity towards new things. It culminated last year when we discovered that his right arm was covered with wounds. Questioning him closely, we were led to a pitch-dark air raid shelter where he squatted down with a flashlight. We found a box of little, flowery snakes. His father asked him with horror where those snakes had come from. Xiaoyun replied, I caught them one after another. This was very odd, because he had been with us every day. Hadn't we watched him with care? I was not always with you, he said. Don't be fooled by superficial appearances, in his casual tone. After his father coaxed him away, I found a hoe and exterminated those little vipers. When we got home, we stayed up nights to prevent his sneaking away again. Yet after 2 days, fresh wounds appeared on his arms, like pairs of red spots from snake bites. He said to us, why bother to tire yourself out? You simply can't understand that I'm only sitting with you in appearance. There's no place I can't go even while I seem to be sitting with you. There are so many snakes, and they lose their way often. So I gather them from here and there so they won't feel lonely. Of course, you can't see them, but yesterday I found one over there under the bookshelf. I can always find snakes if I look around. I was afraid of them when I was young. I even bit a snake's head once. I can't help laughing at myself when I think of it now. He kept talking like this to us. One day, while sitting with his back to us, Xiaoyun suddenly patted his head with his hand. We walked over, and Xiaoyun's mother turned him around so he was facing us. His facial expression was calm and relaxed. Cautiously choosing my words, I asked him what he was thinking about while sitting here, and if he was feeling lonely. Listen, he replied briefly. What do you hear? Nothing. Very quiet. But the situation will change completely after 9 o'clock in the evening. How can you possibly dare to desert us like that? How can we live without you? Xiaoyun's mother started her lament. You can't call it desertion, he said gently. I was born to catch snakes. I advised Xiaoyun's mother not to worry about her son too much. In my opinion, her boy, odd as he was, appeared to be a genius who might one day turn out to be somebody. We don't care if he will be somebody, the mother said. Both his father and I are ordinary people. How is it that we should have a son who is involved in such a shameful business? Raising poisonous snakes? That's frightening. What does he want to do? I might as well have given birth to a poisonous snake. We simply can't stop worrying about him. We've completely become worn out by him. The worst thing is that now he can do strange things even without going outdoors. He always has a way to achieve what he wants. One day I saw Xiaoyun's mother coming out of the air raid shelter with a hoe in her hand. She looked wan and sallow. She told me she had just exterminated another nest of little snakes, 8 altogether. She was almost bald, and she walked like an aged woman. Behind her, Xiaoyun's father, an old man, couldn't stop blinking one eye. Finally, Xiaoyun himself emerged. His back was bent, and he appeared calm. When he saw me, he nodded and started talking. I created this scene of slaughter on purpose. It might even be described as spectacular. 8 lives destroyed once and for all. To them, it was not a matter of any particular terror. I was only surprised by the firmness and confidence of the hands that raised the hoe. When asked if he was the one who took his parents to the shelter, he said yes. As soon as they asked, he took them there. He always maintained a kind of curiosity about his parents' behavior. While he was talking, his mother stared at the sky with her empty eyes, and his father mumbled repeatedly, "Extreme views can cause tremendous difficulty in a person's life, but beautiful scenery can open one's mind." I found that the slaughterer, the mother, was the most crestfallen among the 3, but Xiaoyun remained attached. All at once it dawned on me that there existed a subtle relationship among these 3, a peculiar mutual check. What had just happened was proof. He didn't have to take his parents to shelter. Instead, he could have led them somewhere else. Was this only the result of his easygoing personality? Then I recalled Xiaoyun's infancy. No doubt he had been an extraordinarily sensitive baby with extremely rich facial expressions. The mother had been very proud of him, yet she was nervous. She told me privately that she found the child got tired very easily, particularly when others were talking. As soon as a person started talking to him, he would lower his eyelids and fall into a sound sleep. He's just like one of those sensitive mimosa plants whose leaves fold up when you touch them. He's just not as shy. Xiaoyun kept his habit until he was 5. Then he learned to control himself, though purely for the sake of courtesy. When others talked to him a little bit too long, he would start yawning, then doze off without any consideration for the speaker. At that time, he did not hate traveling. On the contrary, he appeared to like it somewhat because he did not need to listen to others while traveling. While his parents were enjoying the beauty of nature, he would sit down to the side and listen attentively to any smallest sound made by little animals. He could always point out accurately where a field vole had just dug a hole or in which direction a banded crate was advancing quietly. It was possible he had been training his unique listening ability ever since he was born. It seems, however, that this talent had been tuned to the human voice. After several years of practice, he could make certain movements just by activating his mental will. On the surface, he was a soft and obedient kid. Such a child very easily makes people lose their vigilance. The fisherman's child was bitten under such circumstances. Now Xiaoyun's parents were getting hurt. It was a profound puzzle how he considered the people and the objects surrounding him. On the one hand, he seemed to pity those little snakes, but on the other hand, he instigated his parents to slaughter them. Nobody can figure out such contradictory actions. I can't say that the beautiful scenery did not affect him. It may have been the beautiful scenery that cultivated this temperament. After all, different people can appreciate scenery very differently. But the same token, his parents' painstaking efforts to control the child could only lead to the opposite result. Then suddenly there came a day where Xiaoyun stopped meditating facing the wall, and his attitude towards his parents turned warmer. Wherever I went for a visit, I saw the threesome living in harmony. The smile had returned to his mother's face. In the past decade or so, the old lady had been completely tied down by her son, but now even the wrinkles on her face had smoothed out. She said to me happily, "My child Xiaoyun is getting sensible. Just think how many poisonous snakes I've killed for his sake." As she was talking, Xiaoyun in the background was nodding his head in agreement. I did not believe the matter was as simple as that. I felt vaguely the falseness in Xiaoyun's smile. Though he was no longer raising poisonous snakes, who could guess what new trick he might be up to? I decided to talk to him seriously. "Now, I don't need a place to raise snakes," Xiaoyun answered. "They're in my belly. They don't stay inside all the time, of course. They come out whenever I want them to. The little flowery snake is my favorite." Staring at his body, which was getting thinner daily, I asked if his mother knew all about this. But Xiaoyun said it was not necessary to let her know. Since the little snakes did not occupy space, the matter need not be considered to exist so long as he did not mention it. Just let everybody be happy. My next question was whether this would affect his health. He gave me an attentive look, then suddenly appeared sleepy. Yawning hard, he said, "Who doesn't have something like that in his belly? They just don't know, that's all. That's why they're healthy. I'm always sleepy. You talk so much. I rarely talk so much. You're weird." Despite my efforts to ask for more, he dropped his head down and fell into a sound sleep while standing by the table. Xiaoyun's mother got really excited, and she looked much younger now. While packing, she said, "It seems that travel is necessary," with her joy, and Xiaoyun joined her with her joy in packing. But after a while, he turned aside and started vomiting. Nothing serious. He wiped his pale lips and muttered almost secretly, "It was some mischief from the little flowery snake." Quickly, they started their journey on a northwest-bound train. It was a windy day. They did not come back until 2 years later. The three looked the same as they had been, harmonious and peaceful. Nothing unusual could be detected. Xiaoyun obviously had gained some weight, and his face looked healthier than before. When I asked him quietly about the snakes, he said they were still in his belly. But he had learned how to adjust so that even running and doing the high jump would not cause him any harm. Sometimes having snakes in his belly was even beneficial to his health. I asked him what benefit it could bring to the body, and Xiaoyun's yawn started again. He complained that it was painful to listen to others. Xiaoyun's mother invited me for dinner, and while eating, the old lady who used to grumble was now silent. She did not appear as confident as before. Xiaoyun's father only said one sentence, "No more travel." Then everybody was quiet. After that, they kept their front gate open. The parents stopped watching Xiaoyun's behavior as if they had lost interest and become oblivious. But they appeared anxious, and from morning till night, when they checked their watches constantly. He tapped his belly, which was flat. There was no sign of anything inside. According to Xiaoyun, it had worked out fine. Nobody suspected that he raised snakes anymore, but in fact, the leopard can't change its spots. The fall wind was whistling across the plain. It sounded more musical from morning to night. The mysterious family was baffling me more and more. I remembered that the mother was only 50 and the father 55. But just see how old they looked. Both were suffering from cardiac sclerosis, and their slow movements worried me. "He's destroyed us," the father said suddenly one day. His facial expression revealed his confusion. "We are dying so fast." After the remark, his face relaxed instantly. His glance lingered on the skinny shoulder of Xiaoyun. The glance was both kind and loving. The three certainly had a tacit understanding. The parents had difficult explanations about the disappearance of the child. According to the father, the boy had mentioned going to the air raid shelter after supper because he hadn't been there for a long time and he was curious about any new changes there. Neither of the parents had paid any attention to their son's remark. They were too tired. The son then stood up and walked toward the door with staggering steps. Recently, he had become all bony. He did not return that whole night, and nobody bothered looking for him. It's too troublesome, the father said, his eyes fixed on the window pane. Cheyenne's mother never admitted that her son had walked out on her. The child was never reliable. For more than a decade, we'd both kept our eyes open and watching without any obvious effect. What can I say? He could still wander at will without our seeing him. Now I've given up. Who knows whether or not he was my child to start with, or if even he'd been living with us at all. I don't think he left yesterday. I've never even been able to confirm his existence. Listening to them, I became perplexed also. What was Cheyenne, after all? I pondered hard, but in my mind there was only some miscellaneous fragments, some odd remarks. When I tried to concentrate, even the remarks faded away. As a result, I could not think of anything about Cheyenne except his name. Just when everybody believed that he had vanished, however, Cheyenne came back. He resumed his quiet and friendly life at home. His behavior once again contributed to the indifferent attitude of his parents. They no longer cared at all if the boy existed or not. They were simply worn out. Where did you get the name Cheyenne? I asked abruptly. I've been wondering about it myself. Nobody ever gave him that name. Where did it come from? The mother said, looking confused. And that's the end. Thank you so much.
Hello. I'm so happy that I have the wonderful opportunity to meet my readers and friends here and to communicate directly with you. For this, I would like to show my great gratitude to your country and your people, because it's the United States that has given a real recognition to Can Xue first. Let me first give a brief description about the book of The Lost Illusion by my good friend Porochista Khakpour. I read Porochista's Lost Illusion in 2015. When I finished this fantastic novel, I was moved deeply by its expansive visual field and profound description of the souls of mankind. I feel that she is a real wonder. Porochista and I have the same pursuit. Both of us want there to be real harmony in the world and not just harmony on the surface. For this target, a heavy burden is there for artists to shoulder. Nowadays, the chasm becomes deeper and deeper among people in the world, and great anxieties are in everybody's heart. It seems there is no way out for us. For Porochista, as a most sensitive writer, her novel throbs with the pulse of our times, and it actually points out a way for our people in the future. I believe that The Lost Illusion will become more and more important in the history of literature, because the world is becoming a more and more dangerous place to live, and the people have to struggle hard to find a way to survive. Otherwise, destruction will come to us sooner or later. Here, I would like to give a lecture about what is Can Xue's experimental literature. My title is exploring the body and soul through literature. It's translated by Annelise Wasmoen. Human body and soul are a microcosm with a structure that reflects the structure of the universe. Everything that I explore belongs to a world of essence that is neither what is usually considered the fixed phenomenal world nor Sartre's world of being. Because for Sartre, being precedes essence. Precisely because of this ambition, the methods, rules, and principles of my experimental literature are vastly different than the realism and romanticism of the past. Because the point of interest has shifted, in concrete terms, my experimental literature has the following characteristics. 1. Generally speaking, every one of my stories is a riddle. You might call them Can Xue's riddles. That is to say, these stories uncover the enigma of artistic self of the artist Can Xue. Who does the uncovering? The readers do the uncovering. All of the characters in the stories are in fact one person. These roles, taken together, form Can Xue's artistic self as a writer. Maybe some readers will ask, is it too narrow for the stories all to be written about only one person? Please note that what I have said is Can Xue's artistic self. The more profound the body and soul, the more vast and complex it is. The best artist represents humankind and represents nature. Her or his most personal activities has the greatest universality. We can use the sky, the ocean, the stone that lasts for billions of years, and so on, as metaphors for this kind of experimental literature. Every writer and artist of this type possess a godlike self. Over many long years, without growing tired, they use all kinds of figures and images again and again to describe this great self, making this self into a kind of belief. And in fact, isn't the face of this self the original face of nature? 2. My experimental literature cannot be read in the same way as realistic literature or satirical literature, going around in an ordinary way distinguishing between good and evil in the characters or settings. The major characteristic of these works is that there are simply no villains in them. All of the characters reveal, in different ways, the beauty of human nature. Even the description of foul, inferior characters reveal, through irony, the tension of the self-paradox within Can Xue's art. Through a performance with profound meaning, they set in relief the beauty of the artistic self. Reading this kind of fiction will destroy conventional and fixed models of thought. The readers use their own life experiences over and over to have philosophical and metaphysical communication with the characters. I can declare at this point that everything Can Xue has depicted from the early period of writing up to today has been about sublimity of human spirit, and the marvel of human body. Here, I would like to use the example of Shakespeare's tragedy, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar stages two plays at the same time, one in the foreground and one behind the curtains, with the one performed in the dark being the essence of events in the play. In the tragedy, Brutus represents a lofty ideal. Caesar acts out the paradox of a heroic nature, and through sacrificing his body, he causes the concept to be realized. Cassius is analogous to the artist in reality. He gathers good and evil into one body, but with superb technique, he can always place the two conflicting poles of these extremes into balance against each other in an unexpected way. If readers can understand this deeper level of performance, the lines in the play achieve even more their indescribable ability to sink deeper inside you. Your soul will be shocked, with a shock that makes you realize what it means to be a modern person. Modern theater discovers the paradox within humankind and within the universe. It is absolutely not that kind of postmodern theater with confusion for the sake of confusion that cannot answer any questions. Its lofty ideal is to show how its paradoxes are broken through and sublimated. 3. My experimental literature is a kind of summary. It aspires to summon readers together to join our performance, and beyond that, for every reader to flaunt their uniqueness and create literary patterns that belong to them. Because this special kind of literature is completed only by passing through every reader. If readers do not take part in the performance, my work is unfinished. It must continue waiting in the dark. So, what kind of readers are inspired to perform by this kind of writing? What quality do the readers who become this kind of experimental literature need? To summarize from the many years of my own reading practice, this literature requires readers to be highly sensitive with regard to material, physical things, and also with regard to spiritual things. That is to say, sensitive to the writing's content and form. The reading of literary works gives us physical sensitivity. Philosophy gives us strict logic. Both qualities are needed for reading my extremely experimental literature. So, experimental writing does not abandon rationality like postmodernism. On the contrary, it requires a reading practice with stronger training in logical thought. Only readers who can bring logical influence to emotional descriptions and see the shape of things from inside will solve the enigma of the Bible, the enigma of Shakespeare's tragedies, the enigma of 70s Don Quixote, the enigma of Dante's Divine Comedy, the enigma of Kafka's Castle or America, the enigma of Borges' short stories, the enigma of Calvino's If on a Winter Night a Traveler, the enigma of Porochista's Sanatorium under the sign of the hourglass, the enigma of Lucian's Wild Grass, and on and on and on and on. Without logic, readers' responses will always be fragmentary, filled with confusion, and unable to break through that confusion to reach the realm of total joy. 4. Destruction, negation, nihilism, and irrationality are several of distinctive characteristics of postmodernism. The postmodern thought that arises from the negative side of the Nietzsche's spirit has not had any positive effect on the world of ideas. Further, it has not truly been able to destroy the corrupting influence of tradition, because from its origin, it has no faith in humanity. Can Xue's aesthetic view and worldview are devoted to construction instead. I believe the entirety of nature or the universe is constructed by humanity. It is humanity's nature. Humanity and nature are one body, while humankind is also nature's highest level organ, because nature was only constructed once human existed. A artist's every act of creation is to construct nature, not destroy her. Destructive art is not aimed at a high enough level. It is a weak art, without a strong life force, and it is not the living art filled with rational spirit. Weak art has no future. It is only born to die. The living art I belong to has its own metabolic mechanism, replacing the old with the new. It can grow while being criticized. It gains strength from innovation. This new type of literature launches from the energy of reason and perception in the freest way possible. It makes a stone that has been silent for billions of years open its mouth and speak. It also makes the pettiest and poorest people into creators of new words. It is the most constructive literature in history. Therefore, it has no affinity with terms for negative emotion, such as decadence, detachment, despair, even though there is despair within it. It is there to inspire greater passion, to dash the door to that dark century, and to construct literature out of emotions, one that develops according to the metabolism of one's own body. 5. In a sense, the practice of my experimental fiction can also be seen as a practice of fusing Chinese culture with Western classical philosophy and literature. Although what Western classical literature and classical philosophy thought were not exactly the same, they are different at the core. Through my 30 years of creative practice, I have discovered the divergence between literary thought and philosophical thought in the Western classics. And I am also considered a writer who has a thorough knowledge of Chinese culture. I have seen through Western philosophy's fatal weakness and bottleneck in its development. So today, I throw myself into a new enterprise of construction. This completely original construction comes to me easily because of the superiority of the ancient Chinese wisdom I possess, and also because of my familiarity with Western culture. My writings, among many other writings, always seem very transparent and lofty. They even appear intimidating to people. I think this is directly related to the way I unconsciously contrast the foreign culture to myself, and use this observation to study, explore, and critique myself more deeply, and then at last construct a completely new self that is neither Western nor Chinese. 6. In classical philosophy, human discourse is described as logos, which is also rational spirit. But Can Xue's fiction completely overturned the distinctions of classical philosophy. In experimental fiction, discourse is no longer what is usually referred to as logos. It takes on an embodied material function, so that everything signified by it symbolizes the figure of the Mother of Dark Earth. Of course, this body of Mother Earth must still pass through perception and the mind to be expressed. But this kind of expression is no longer the clear voice of logos. Instead, what it expresses is obscure, vague, full of suggestive, allegorical layers of material intentionality. Yet the discourse of my dark mother of the earth is absolutely not irrational, not in the way that is described as postmodern. On the contrary, a rational spirit permeates the discourse of my dark mother of the earth, which is the material mode of the discourse of logos, while the discourse of logos is the spiritual mode of this artistic discourse. The two are intertwined with each other. So I would stress here that the language of my experimental fiction contains a rational spirit. It seems drifting and unstable, even unfathomable, but it is regulated by internal mechanism. Only readers who understand the deeper structure of this discourse can hope to appreciate the beauty of the dark mother of the earth, and to carry out the performance of freedom through interacting with the text. The dark mother of the earth cannot speak herself, but the people can speak for her. People use speech to embody her, that is, their own bodily experience. Over thousands of years, people have speech, but have forgotten the existence of this mother's body. So they use speech itself to replace her. This is what has taken place in the world of ideas. My experimental fiction is a kind of appeal. It appeals to people to return to their bodies, which Mother Earth sustains, and raise the living body to a metaphysical level, to a plane even with the spirit. 7. Within world literature as it exists today, My type of experimental literature contains the greatest tension, because in this kind of literature, the two poles of opposition are displayed by the writer to the greatest extreme. For readers, this is like flying across a chasm. Because of this unusual tension, the reader cannot easily find the point of inspiration for himself. He will often waver and wait for a long time, making evaluations and judgments that seems to be right but are wrong. The reader is also absorbing the information in the work, allowing the two parts of himself to merge and to separate, which helps to produce some new design. Sometimes the prolonged anxiety produces the effect of pain, and this suffering will not let him achieve the satisfaction he wants. Under these circumstances, the reader's best choice is to give up temporarily. For all kinds of reasons, he has not found the correct method. He should try again after training the various faculties that readers need. This is where my fiction is different than detective stories. This kind of fiction takes more than just mental ability. The reader's physical and emotional substance must also come into play. Many readers have asked me, is confusion the main effect of reading this kind of experimental fiction? If readers persevere and do not retreat from confusion, is that itself the sign of successful reading? My view is that the feeling of confusion is only one of the main features of the process of reading my experimental fiction. If a reader never rises above confusion, from beginning to the end, does not glow with feelings of elation, beautiful clarity, and happiness, then his reading is a failure. The best thing to do is give up. For now, wait until more training has improved the faculties, and try again. Not looking for answers to riddles, not breaking the part to see what's inside it. This is a flaw in the worldview of Sartre and others like him that has had such a bad influence on today's young people. Because his pure truth is not based on any standard. And my experimental literature is like this. If you do not seek the answer to the riddle, you will not experience the tension and the structure of the writing. Without seeing how the inner mechanism of literary work functions, you cannot interact with it to begin your own creation. You can only stand at the edge and describe unsystematic, fragmentary impressions that do not have much to do with the writing. We are seeking the pleasure of creation, overcoming difficult topics through sublimation, and constructing our own ideal pursuit. Reading in this way is not a pure masochism or narrow self-admiration. Instead, it is broadening horizons, bravely enriching and improving one's essential quality through communication with other people. In this process of merging with other people's art, you will become an artist too. 8. I also want to talk about a sense of humor in Can Xue's writing. Many readers have experienced the penetrating humor of Can Xue's experimental fiction. There is some overlap between this humor and the humor of modernist Western literature. For example, Don Quixote and the Castle. But it is also quite different because this is a literary practice of a listener, a Chinese person, compared to that somewhat pessimistic humor in Western literature. Can Xue's style of humor is more positive, inspiring, and self-improving. Because no matter whether you are writer or reader, if you really take up black humor to the end, what I mean is to critique yourself and to realize yourself in wholeness at the same time. It will nourish your spirit and unfolding to your body. If you stop the practice of black humor, that sense of freedom will disappear. Your sense of pleasure depends on your subjective effort and your desire to critique, and only this unrelenting desire to critique can lead to brand new conception. As a Chinese artist who does not believe in God, Can Xue takes experimental fiction to be life practice. He holds her fate tightly in her own hands, never letting go, and with a humor of great intensity, reveals the ideal realm of art. The achievement of Can Xue's humor comes from absorbing the marrow of two different cultures into her art, allowing them to divide in their combination and to combine in their division. From them is born a new approach to the world that unites China and the West. This kind of humor has the West's enterprise spirit and the wisdom of ancient China. So its prospects in the future rise of the New World literature should be vast. 9. I would like to say something about the new form of poetics in Can Xue's experimental literature. There are already readers who point out the rich poetics of Can Xue's fiction. What kind of poetry is there in my early work, Yellow Mud Street? For example, this long novella full of piss and shit, trash, dead rats, rotten fruits, ulcers, sewage on the ground, ashes in the air, and on and on and on. Can this description be seen as poetic? But in Can Xue's aesthetics, this is possible. I think of Yellow Mud Street as a long lyrical poem. It is a scene of a poet's soul and body waking, beginning to rise up and make an independent performance. All of life's sensation revive. People feel the corruption of their environment, and this prime decay is the breeding ground for a powerful life force. I am Yellow Mud Street. I will dance gracefully in the fields, performing the extremes of human nature. This dark, material poetics should be the strongest voice of the age. In the novella, there is conspiracy. That conspiracy is a trick of human nature, and also the embodiment of nature's preset mechanism to launch the body into a fatal struggle. Even though it was the first book, And even I did not know what exactly Yellow Mud Street would perform. That intensely poetic form is already fully visible. It is not the same as the majority of Western poems that praise the pure spirit. Its realm is analogous to Dante's Inferno, but with even more stress on physical bodily knowledge. This new model of poetics is a fusion of Chinese and Western cultures, and a true unification of soul and body. Body is also poetic, and is the basic substance of poetry. The conspiracy resides in the body, and someday the body that gains its powerful life force from decay rises up and starts to cause trouble. The mechanisms of opposition and its particular free rhythm can be deduced in the obscure poetry of this early work. If you ask what the difference is between Can Xue's poetics and the poetics of modernist literature, it is in its just, bold praise of physical freedom. In her experimental fiction, from decay is born these petty little characters, and a lot like Dante's kings and famous people from history and so on, who all features metaphysical sublimity. It is those little characters who sometimes do not even have surnames who are elevating the level of human spirit. And for this, they rely on the explosive force of that yielding of the spirit to the body. This poetic dance of the interaction between soul and body appears energetic and tough in comparison to the poetic dance of pure spirit. The purity of its ideal state is also strengthened by contrast. This kind of poetic energy erupts like a volcano, announcing the approach of a new era in literature. 10. The entirety of Can Xue's experimental fiction can be seen as a new form of comedy, and I believe that a new comic area in literature has arrived in the new millennium. The tragic area of Beckett, Camus, and Sartre has passed. Even though humankind met with great difficulties, the first indication of a hidden turning point have appeared. The world did not develop in the exaggerated way predicted by Beckett and others, and by postmodernism, but instead proceeded in secret according to a different law. Can Xue's experimental fiction is on the forefront as a type of fiction that from its first appearance filled the air with a feeling of a new era, even though this is still not recognized by the majority of readers, while it shows its superiority through its stubborn life force. The worldview and aesthetic view of this fiction separated it from the former postmodern literature. Because of the mechanism of opposition inside of it, it has developed into a constructive and positive literary style. This is a kind of growing literature with a healthy oppositional mechanism that leads to constant self-improvement, so that the destructive type of postmodern argument is also rejected by it. literature that treats the self humorously and is thoroughly humorous will naturally have a comic spirit. Its narrative and writing style will constantly show joy, wild ecstasy, crying with laughter, and the black, harsh characteristics of modern comedy. This kind of comic spirit is not a complete despair. It is rising in spite of everything, being the determination of struggle with fate to the end. In short, it exists to strengthen our will to live and will to freedom. People must construct this kind of self-critical and self-generative mechanism in order to break through the bottleneck of the old classical aesthetic and open a new frontier of continuously expanding self and continuously constructed nature. People should not stagnate in nostalgia for the classical spirit. They should never stop elevating and devoting themselves to creation. As spiritual beings in the natural world, this is our duty. All who scorn elevators will be left behind by the trends of the future. Since the world is constructed by us, whether she is destroyed is in part decided by the human subjective will. This subjective will is also the will of nature. I, as an artist, can already say today that nature's subjective will is for people to survive, to create a new life of freedom. I tell everyone this prophecy in the form of a humorous comedy in order to point out a new path for creation as self-generating and constructing nature. Walking along this road, we will become more intelligent than in the past and will have happier and more rewarding lives. One person, whether his ability is great or small, can face life with the humorous spirit of comedy. He will have a goal, a passion to pursue. It will be difficult for him to sink into depression. The period of backed-style hopelessness has become memory, and postmodernism is no more than a tributary stream in the current of human thought. Developmental laws of these areas' intellectual movements are dimly visible, and artists, as the most sensitive, receptive organs of nature, can often foresee historical laws. When we turn our gaze on ourselves, we also connect ourselves in unity to nature, and sooner or later, we will all discover the steep path of rebirth in our practice. It is challenging to battle, seductive and testing. In the ecstasy of humor, it will let us creatively return to nature's embrace. Thank you.
I will redirect your questions, and then it'll be translated, and then she'll say it in Chinese, and it'll be translated back. So does anyone have any questions? She's loved questions, I have to say, and we've had some really animated Q&A. So feel free to ask her anything. She will have a great answer. Yes? Did everybody hear that? It's like she wanted to know how the
我听懂了。
experience of hearing the novel in English.
当然是不同了，那个翻译的和那个原作的是有不同的了。那就好像是一个自我的新的那个版本就产生出来了。我一般看了我的那些出版的那些英文的那些版本呢，应该说都很成功，当然有的更加好一点了。我是觉得很兴奋的，因为透过那个英语的那种意境来看自我了，看得更清楚。比那个就是他们翻译的这5个里面，他们不一定每一篇都一模一样，有时候有稍微弱一点的，但是基本上这些大的东西都很好。我觉得像《五香街》啊，那个最后的情人啊，还有一些那个短篇啊，短篇基本上都很好。
So there's many versions of translations, and I feel that they all have very good versions, and it's interesting to look at the versions, the different versions. It functions as a mirror for me to see what are possible versions of the work. For example, in Five Spice Road, the lovers, the lost lover.
我觉得也很好，当然那种中国式的幽默不可能全部原版把它就搞成那个中国式的英语了，是吧？它要有对应的那个了，但是幽默感基本上都翻译出来了，全部都翻译出来了。
There's some lost in translation within the Chinese humor, but for the most part, I feel that it's pretty good.
Yes, there's one over here.
好。邓小芒，哥哥，好，你翻。
Yeah, why don't you translate before
很难翻的。从天上看见深渊是那个鲁迅的那个一句话，从天上看见深渊。Actually, I have studied Western philosophy for 7 years. Every day I cost 4 or 5 hours to study Western philosophy because my fiction writing only costs 1 hour. So I have a lot of times every day.
Stops writing after 1 hour, only 1 hour a day, every day. But then the rest of the day is all reading.
From Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche, even the Merleau-Ponty, French philosopher, Sartre, Heidegger, Marx, all of them I have studied 7 years and wrote a very big book. The title is The Rise it seems like that. I don't know how to translate. The rise of matter, a critic of thoughts, being and nothingness. It's like that. I'm not sure. This book is one, if we translate it into English, maybe 1,000 pages. Well, published in 2017 or 18 by Beijing University Press, a very famous press.
What else? Someone back in the back. Yes, you in the white. Yes, you. Great, that works.
我说中文算了，也比较复杂。第一个问题的那个区分，说外面一个世界，然后里面还有一个世界了，这种那个区分是一种机械的那个区分，就是不对的了。在我的那种世界观里面，没有什么外面的那个世界或者是里面的世界，不是这样区分的。只有表层的，就是现实，我们大家公认的现实和那个本质的世界 ，essence， the nature of essence， 只有这种区分，在我来说，因为大家都公认那种所谓外面的那个世界，就习惯了这种机械的那个区分，实际上那是不对的，要慢慢的把那个思维把它转换一下，把它变成那个辩证的区分，就里和外，它是互为那个本质的，没有什么绝对的外面的或者是绝对的里面的。
I believe that the division between outer and inner, it's a very mechanical division that I attempt to make more complicated using a dialectical method, and it's more complicated than just
表层的，我
the
用的那个
surface and nature essential.
他说的那个外面的就是表层的，大家公认的。
The surface, which what we all see.
我的文学是本质的文学，是 essence。
My literature is more about the essence and not the surface.
然后他说到那个中国哲学和西方哲学，我因为我是一个中国人，我又是一个作家，所以我在日常生活中就体会我们中国的文化了，就比一般的平常人要更加深。你翻译。
So I, living in China and coming from the Chinese culture, on a daily basis, I use material from that culture.
所以我觉得我自己是最典型的中国人。
I feel I'm quite a typical Chinese.
而且对中国文化的体会也是最深的，因为我是一个艺术家，感觉特别灵敏，也比较深。
I'm quite deeply responsive to everything that's around me.
就从这个基础出发呢，我就开始研究西方的那个哲学。
From this standpoint, my being in China and my relation to Chinese culture, I look to Western cultures.
I studied Western philosophy and very interested in it. 通过这种自己是一个中国人，然后把西方的那个文化拿来做镜子，这种训练，就好多年的训练 ，practice。
I coming from a Chinese culture, and I use the Western culture as a mirror to look at myself situated in Chinese culture.
这样呢，就能够把自我看得更加清楚。这是跟一般的中国作家大概是一个最大的区别，和外国作家也不同。
To be able to see oneself, one's situated culture through the other. That's how I'm different from other Chinese writers, and also how I'm different from other Western writers.
把别人看作自己，这是我的那个哲学的那个理论的核心。
To see
other.
To see the other as myself. That's the core of my philosophy.
就是这样的。可能回答了你的问题吧。
More questions? Yes, the gentleman right here at the blue.
Some. No, wait, attention to. I understand the question. I never think about that kind of problem when I writing. I let the body performs itself more freely, the better. I always do things like that every day for hour, anytime, mornings or afternoons. As soon as sit down, grasp the pen, I writing continuously for an hour. Feel very happy, elation. That's body's sense, I think. I always feel happy.
Many people were asking her about writer's block at many of the institutions that we were at, and many students wanted advice. And her answer was she does not relate to that. She's never had it in her life. She can always write, and she loves it.
Actually, all of my writing is a huge holes, no ending. When I wrote some phrase, then sometimes I think, okay, let it be. Maybe it's an ending. but sometimes it there is really an ending. It's depend on my emotion.
What else? I think one at the very far back. Yes.
You were saying mytho-realism?
Magical realism.不是的，他们就是那样认为的。That division, I think is very naive. Not real literally division. Maybe it's not. No, that kind of censorship. Mm. 有一点那个 censorship Five Spice Street 有一点修改了很多地方，也就是在90年代的时候。
There were some edited versions of Five Spice. There were some changes.
那是因为他们担心有那个 sex description. Very naive. My religious stories is definitely different from those Chinese writers' village description. Because it's 那个图景怎么讲啊？It's a landscape of spirit and body. I deserve 发挥express my language of body and spirit in this kind of way. Very colorful, mysterious background. I like this background. But sometimes it's in the city. Most of the time in the village or suburb outside the city. I think maybe the reason for my unconscious choice is because the body's influence. Body want to express itself. More material, colorful, trees, grass, stone, mountain, river, this kind of things. Of course, the city is the 皇冠怎么讲？就是皇帝戴的那个帽子，王冠。
Emperor's crown.
是city is a crown of nature.
What? Someone had a question right here. Was there a woman over here? Yes.
Mm. 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 Mm.我对自己的定位是新经典主义。
I use the term
neoclassicism。
neoclassicism.
因为我的那些，你可以，假如是真正的读懂了的话，那些文章的那个结构是非常的坚强的。
If you follow through my writings, the structure is actually quite. It holds up really well.
我的那个 speech 里面也讲了这些嘛，
I
我的自
mentioned
定位
this。in the speech.
但是不是过去的那个经典。
It's not the old classics.
是完全翻过来了。就是 the turnover。
Yeah, it's I turn over. It's classics. I'm still using.
它是身体的语言。
It's a body language.
Do we have time for a few more, Ken? I'm sorry. Go on. I didn't mean to cut. Sorry. Okay. Yes, Jess.
你好。I think the change is very small, because those economic earn more money, this kind of things, it's surface things. Actually, the core is still the old, very tradition. So for 30 years, my practicing, I never influenced by the society, economic, this kind of. I think Chinese is a country have a long old history. The change must be very slowly. Maybe if I want my readers read, a majority of the readers read my work, maybe I should wait at least 20 or 30 years. Our country is like that. From my beginning, 1989, that time to today, my readers, the circles become more but larger, but not that huge circles, just larger than the beginning. I'm very satisfied with this compared with our history.
Someone else had a hand. Yeah, yes.
I
wonder if you have any advice for
One, you feel resistant to Western culture.
No, I'm not resistant. Just thinking
You nostalgia.
No, I mean I see issues that there's more depth in traditional culture, which was the colonization, like, development. I think Cultural Revolution. I think, yeah, just in general, I think. And to link it up to my first question about translation.
Let me, 我的那个记忆力不好，就 let me answer the first. My advice is keep your curious to Western culture. Since you come here, it's a very rare, precious experience for you. Curious is most important because as a Chinese, Western culture is your mirror. If you want to see yourself clearly, you must use the mirror. The Western culture is a better, much better mirror than Chinese tradition, because you live in there, and you come here, a foreign country. This mirror, I think, is great chance for young people. 这是第一个问题。
Yeah, my guess is she'd also add to it that the
Nostalgia is not good.
Yeah.
Nostalgia. Keep your tradition. Always stay in the same old place. That's not good.
a relish in the feeling of being an outsider too. I think is sort of the coda to that as well.
Yeah, I have a personal struggle. Like, I'm in a English program, and I take some poetry workshop or fiction workshop, but like I'm writing in English. But like, yeah, just the language struggle. I guess like sometimes I feel like some things like express better in Chinese, but not translatable.
You can find a way. Translate. Communication is most important. Any translation will lose something, but will gain more, much more. So it's a worth thing to do.
Sounds like you have to become an experimental writer. Thank you. Yes. Yes, yes. You had a-
我听你说，你跟西方哲学的关系，我在读你的作品的时候，有想，就是觉得，有一种喜乐的心情，我觉得跟可能在他的那个中国文学史上面说，中国文学与外国文学的最大的不同是，通过中国文学有那种喜乐的心情，对天与地的那种崇敬的那种心情。
天人合一。
对，然后这是我一个我想问一下你对于就是中国的就是以前那些文学的传统，你最喜欢的是哪个部分？
Dreaming of a Red Chamber.
So the question
Yeah.
was,
When I was young, I read at least maybe several decades times.
so the question was, she was referring to a Chinese literary scholar, Hu Nanchen, who wrote about the main difference between Chinese and Western literature.
Yeah.
And the main difference she pointed out is that there's a sense of joy in Chinese literature, which you feel in reading Can Xue's books. And there's a sense of the Chinese concept of heaven, earth, and man as one that she pointed out.
I think it should be right, and it is like that. Because I'm an artist, a Chinese artist. The Chinese culture is my essence, the core. Also, the Western culture, literature, philosophy are my essence and the core nowadays. I take the Western, change it into myself.
The second part of that question was, what are some of your influences from Chinese literature? And she mentioned Chamber of Red, the House of Red Chambers.
Yes, you had a question right here.
I especially appreciated where you talked about the connection between the rational and the generative, or like that creative force. And I wonder if you have any comments or practical advice for fellow artists who are struggling with a pattern torment. Like, I just notice sometimes it's in the news cycle and it's in people just kind of like their words stumble or they feel restricted in some way, and sometimes you see a mood kind of dispersing among the people, and it the way that I've seen it impact artists in the last couple of years has been really disturbing, and like multiple people will call and they'll say almost the exact same thing, so there seems to be just a pattern in that, and so I really appreciated what you said about the joy or the ecstasy of clarity, and the joy in like releasing expectation of the text and kind of embracing history. And so if you had any advice at all for what seems to be like not exactly a force, you know, it's not exactly destructive, it doesn't seem to really do anything to this generative force that you're talking about, but it really impacts people. What can we do? What can we share with each other?
I'm sorry, you were saying what feels stuck, or
Any comment really, like it's kind of a wide question. Any comment or practical advice for that spirit of torment, or some things that seem to try and interrupt, right? The rational spirit or the creative force.
So the torment that you mentioned is the Western philosophical crisis. That's the bottleneck that you had mentioned in the speech.
这个方面，我同这位读者有共同的那个感受。
And I am empathetic to this situation.
我刚才在那个 lecture 里面也讲了，就是要建立起那个自我批判的机制 mechanism.
And I mentioned in the speech about this mechanism to self-critique.
这种机制需要两个方面的那个素质，
This needs two elements.
一个就是那个感觉性的东西了 body sense，
Bodily sense
还有和那
perception,
个理性精神。
and rationality.
之所以现代的那个很多艺术家还有哲学家，他们不能够突破出去，被自己纠缠。
The reason why a lot of people are stuck in this crisis
是因为他们把那个经典的、古典的那个理性精神，全部要把它扫进垃圾堆。
is because they tend to throw the classical elements into the dustbin.
那样做了以后呢，就缺少一个判断的机制 ，judgment，
So they lose any criteria of judgment.
就不知道你写的这个东西是不是好。
So there's no way to tell if it's good or not.
你写下来，像我每天写，我是有那个判断机制的，我里面写1个小时，不是乱写的。
So, so I work within the limits of knowing something that I can work against or with.
但是我这种判断机制呢，也不是那个经典哲学的那种纯理性的判断机制。
But the materials that I work and use to judge with are not just merely classical.
而是一种混合体，就是精神跟那个身体物质的那个混合。
It's a mixture of spiritual and bodily materials.
还中国文化和西方文化的混合，这样一个新的机制。
It's a mix of Chinese and Western culture.
所以我很幸运，我有了这个机制，我就能够不断的创造。
I'm lucky to have these two elements to work with together.
这个机制来自于我努力的学习西方的文化30多年。
This I've been able to use after learning 30 years from the Western philosophy.
She liked that question. Yeah. Anything? I think we have time for a couple more, maybe, or one more. What do you think, Ken? I don't know. We could go on forever. Both of us will just go on. Who? Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. You. It's just since you haven't spoken yet. Yep.
谢谢。我没说没有幽默感，没说。贝克特很幽默。
Yeah, just to clarify that Beckett has a lot of humor. She never said otherwise.
Mm. 就是一种。最大的区别就是我刚才那个。我刚才已经在那个 lecture 里面也说了，就是我的那种创作了，我小说的创作了，跟那个西方的小说的创作和哲学的最大的那个区别，是在于我是那个肉体发生。
I mentioned earlier in the lecture that my main difference with Western literature is how my work comes from my body.
那个身体的声音。
Sounds from the body.
这种声音呢，因为不是我们古老的那种文化的那种天人合一的那种东西了，而是有理性精神加入到里面的那种身体的发生。
So it's a bodily experience, but it's not the traditional Chinese idea of nature, man, and earth, but it's more a mixture from
Chinese culture, 就是 material nation where mixed these two, rational spirit.
Yeah, mixing with rationality.
所以这种那个身体的发生的那个文学呢，更加有底气。我把它说成是那个那个有基础了，基质。
So I use the body as a figure ground for where everything conjures.
它就不像西方的那种纯精神的文学那么样脆弱， 就容易，因为他们都是经常说到那个 destroyed， 就很容易 destroyed 了。我这种东西它不会 destroy， 那个我是大自然，我信仰的是大自然一个矛盾 paradox， 这种东西它不会 destroy 的。它哪怕是我们人类灭亡了，肯定总有一天要灭亡的了，是吧？它还会从另外的地方生出来这种高级的东西，因为我们人类就是大自然，这是我的天人合一，这是我向西方学习了之后的新的天人合一。
So the Western aspect, Western literature comes from a more higher, pure spirit, and it's quite weak. And where I come from, my position is more of the body, where the body is part of nature.
Dark earth.
Dark earth. Yeah. And it's even if there's no more humans, there still will be some materiality that will survive.
Because our human being is the nature itself.
Human as the organ of nature.
I've learned a lot from this concept because I remember even last night, short anecdote, when we were on the train and we had both discovered that we were both born in the year of the snake, and we were reading little descriptions on the year of the snake on the internet, and I suddenly said, "Oh no, it says we're materialistic, horrible." And she goes, "Oh, that's wonderful." And I said, What do you mean? And she said, "I love earthly pleasures." And it reminded me of so many things that she says about the body, because from a contemporary Western perspective, a very popular contemporary Western perspective, we have linked the body so much to trauma. And it has become overused, I think, currently as something that's only tied to trauma. So when I even hear the body, I find it provocative, but I find it linked to shame instantly. And when you read her work or you hear her speak about it, it decontextualizes that from there and brings it back to, like, for instance, nature. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
For me, body is the first, but it's even with the spirit, the two forming a paradox, take each other as their essence.
I love that. Well, I think you should get her to sign your book, because she has only come to the US once every few years. So this is really and truly a major opportunity to get her to sign your book. We'll linger here for a little bit and you can say something. But thank you so much, Can Xue. Thank you for our translator and Asian American Writer Workshop for having us.